Alright, so this is Mortal Shell. I actually took a look at the beta for this not too long ago, but hey, the full game is out now, so let's take a look at it. Mortal Shell is a Souls-like that is trying for the whole, hardcore action RPG thing, and doing a pretty good job of it, if I do say so myself, with some pretty neat mechanics. So the whole idea is that you are what one of the characters calls a foundling. You are not actually the armored dude you see in the background right now. The foundling is a sort of horrifying-looking, white-skinned, I guess what you would look like if you didn't have any skin and all of your muscle and sinews and everything were showing, only completely white and with no face. You are just this sort of strange, faceless being, and to be honest, even going through the game, I'm still not 100% sure exactly what you are lore-wise, but you have the ability to take over shells, which is why the game is called that, and the shells are of various fallen warriors that you can find throughout the world, and you can take them over and use their bodies for your own. There are 4 possible shells, and they're all quite a bit different, each with their own maximum health, maximum stamina, maximum resolve values, a bit of a different way of dodging, and their own suite of upgrades, and this big upgrade radial thing that's different from everyone else, and so they each sort of have their own focus. The one that you're seeing in the background right now is Aerodrum, who is a sort of tanky, big armored boy, who is mostly about just survival and like huge burst damage in duels and things. He's got some pretty neat stuff, and I usually don't play like big tanky dudes in games. I tend to play like sort of spell sword kind of guys in action RPGs like this, so I decided to just try something different. I found this guy and I thought, you know what, let's just try him and see what happens, and it turns out he's actually really fun. And really all of the shells are, and I like that they each have their own focus and they're very different from each other, so that none of them feel like they're interchangeable really, they're all quite different. There are also 4 weapons, and these are not limited to a shell. You can use any weapon with any shell that you want, so the combinations are a pretty interesting part of the game, since the shell's overall upgrades may cause you to want to use different weapons for different reasons, so there is some build variety here, although for the most part you still will be playing as a large dude smacking other dudes, because there is no magic or anything like that, so it's very melee focused. And one of the main mechanics, and the one that I was most impressed by in the beta, is the harden mechanic. On the left trigger you have the harden skill, which turns you into stone for a brief period, well really for as long as you hold the trigger down. But as soon as you're hit by something, then you will untransform and be back to your normal fleshy self. This is really cool because it's basically an on-demand invincibility frame kind of idea, and it allows you to just survive just about anything without getting harmed. But of course, it's on a cooldown, so you got to be careful about using it since you can't just spam it all the time. The cool thing about this is there is no animation associated with it on purpose, so that you can use it at any time. Mid-attack, just by standing there, mid-dodge, mid-item use animation, even while falling through the air. And in fact, there is an upgrade for each shell that allows you to do the big ground slam if you harden in the air. So yeah, the fact that you can use it whenever you want is really cool, and it makes it one of those sort of interesting open-ended mechanics that I really appreciate in games, like the blink from Dishonored, for instance, things that you can just sort of figure out how to use yourself in various ways. There isn't like a context-sensitive button that makes it do specific things, it's just, here's a cool ability, you can use it whenever you want. So figure out all the various ways in which you can use it yourself to sort of make your own strategies with it, and I always appreciate mechanics like that. You can do some cool stuff with it. The obvious, of course, just blocking attacks with it to make sure you don't get hurt by big incoming blows and things is, the clear use, but you can also do stuff like freezing before an attack goes off if an enemy is slightly out of range, and then hardening when they're in range so you swing and don't actually miss the swing that was originally going to miss, or using it in combination with the dodge so that you feel that maybe you can dodge one of the attacks, but the follow-up might be coming out a little bit too fast, so you can harden mid-dodge to avoid the first one, and then you'll be invincible for the second sort of follow-up. You can even harden right as the attack hits an enemy for extra impact, and or harden during an attack animation so that enemies will hit you, and then the attack will go off like right as the harden ends from them hitting you, so they all take a bunch of damage and get knocked back, and you sort of save yourself trading blows. So it's a really neat mechanic that allows you to just sort of use it however you want, and I'm really glad that it's this flexible, because it really adds a sort of different identity to the game that focuses around the clever use of this hardening mechanic as often as possible to be a major part of the combat, and it's just really neat to see something that's quite different like this. I've never really seen an action RPG with like a dedicated invincibility button, although it does not make the game as easy as it sounds, because it is on quite a long cooldown, and you have to be careful about using it in different situations, because there are some attacks that can, they don't necessarily hurt you through hardening, but they can still knock you down and stuff if you do it wrong, so that you'll be open for other attacks. So it does take some clever use, and it's just a really neat idea, honestly. You do have the souls mechanic, where you kill enemies and gather a resource, then if you die, you leave that resource where you died and have to go back and retrieve them, and in this case they're called tar, but there's also a second resource that you need for upgrading your character, and they're called glimpses. And glimpses work a bit differently because you don't lose them when you die, but they take a while to accrue, and they are unique to each shell, because they sort of represent like a glimpse into the past of that person, who they were. So if you have, say, 15 glimpses on a shell and then you switch to a different one, they don't transfer over. The 15 are kept on the other one, so if you want to use them, you have to go back to that other one or gather new ones for a new shell. And you need both tar and glimpses to upgrade yourself, and this is where one of the biggest mechanical differences from the Dark Souls games comes in that you don't increase stats or anything like that when you upgrade. There is no strength or dexterity or anything of that sort. The amount of like health and stamina and everything that each shell has mostly stays the same throughout the game. There are a couple of upgrades for some of them that might change that, but for the most part, what they start with is what they end with. The upgrades are different sort of passive abilities instead that you get. And they're actually pretty cool. So you will find this lady named Sister Janessa. Yes, Sester, not sister. They are called brothers and sisters in this game. I don't know exactly why that is, but that's the term they went with, so we'll go with it. And the lady that you find, Sister Janessa, is your bonfire. She is the lady that, the level up wife that's in every game that you go to spend your resources. That's also what respawns enemies and refills your health and everything when you talk to her. And you need to spend tar and glimpses to upgrade each shell. The shells have a unique upgrade sort of radial, like a tree thing, and every upgrade is different for every shell, except for the bottom three, which are always the same, which involve a kick that's extremely useful, that allows you to unbalance enemies, even the big guys. A ability to regain your extra life, because you actually do have a sort of second life, last chance sort of idea that I'll go on to in a minute, and the ability to harden in the air and do a big ground pound thing, although that one does change depending on the shell. Like, for instance, this big heavy guy has a much harder hitting ground pound because he's so heavy. But all of the other upgrades will be unique to each one, and just as some examples, the initial sort of starting shell, the sort of jack-of-all-trades knight guy who's really cool, gets a lot of harden-based upgrades, so he can like decrease the cooldown of his harden and things like that, so he can use it a lot better than the other characters, you could say, because his upgrades mostly focus on using it in different ways. This guy that you see in the background has stuff like increasing his maximum health, making him do more damage to enemies that are alone, which is hilarious against bosses, and getting a damage decrease when he kills an enemy, so that dealing with crowds is a little bit easier, because as you kill them you'll get less damage dealt to you, so it helps with crowd control. And there's even one that allows him to get a stacking damage buff as he kills enemies that stacks all the way up to 100, that increases his base damage significantly after a while, which is pretty sweet. And there are others as well. Solomon is a really cool shell that has mostly like resolve, special ability based stuff. He would be like the sort of magic-y guy if there were magic in the game. And TL the Acolyte, who has a unique sort of shadow step dodge instead of the normal dodge roll, and a lot of his stuff is based around poison and stuff, including one that actually makes poison heal him once you get it, so that's like an extremely useful one, especially for one particular dungeon in the game where there's a lot of stuff that can poison you. So yeah, each of these definitely represents different gameplay styles, and as you upgrade them, those gameplay styles will get diversified a little bit by all the different passives they can get. So I do like this system, and it's cool that each upgrade also comes with a little bit of a glimpse into who they were. They get a voice-acted snippet of their past, because the whole concept is that you, as the person inhabiting the shell, is learning more about the person that they used to be and why they're here, and that's how they're getting these abilities. In fact, to even start upgrading a shell, you have to seek its name, because when you first climb into it, you don't know who they are. So you have to go to the assessor and pay some tar to have them named, and you sort of start to understand who they are, and at that point you can upgrade them. So it's a really neat system that integrates the gameplay and the sort of obscure lore by making you need to sort of understand the pasts of these warriors in order to make them stronger and sort of work for you better, which is pretty cool. I mentioned you do have a second life. If you get your health depleted the first time, you're knocked out of your shell, but you're not killed. You have a couple of moments to sort of stand back up and then try and either fight as the foundling if you want to, but the foundling can only take one hit, so you have to be careful. They can still harden though. And you can climb back into your shell and have your health fully restored. If you look in the bottom left and you see that little white lamp next to the health gauge and everything, that represents the fact that you have an extra life intact. Get your health depleted a second time though, and you are dead, so be careful. I also mentioned there were 4 weapons. This game is going for more of like the Bloodborne definition of weapons instead of like the Dark Souls definition, where there are lots and lots of them with similar movesets and just a lot of variety and stuff. In this case, they're going for fewer weapons that are each a little bit deeper, more well-defined, more complex. It doesn't quite have the Bloodborne moveset complexity, but it's getting there, and it's very clearly based on an idea like that, you know, where there's fewer weapons that are deeper rather than a larger number of weapons with varying movesets and things. So I like both options, honestly, as long as they're done well. I don't mind either one. And the 4 weapons are actually very different and do complement the different sort of playstyle varieties that these passive upgrades can give your characters. You have the starting weapon, the Hallowed Sword, which is a very large sword, but it's one of the faster weapons. You have the Mace, which is not your traditional like one-handed handheld mace that you think of when you hear the word. It's like a big blade staff thing. It's like a mace on a stick that is a bit slower but hits for a lot of damage and has some fiery abilities. You have the Martyr Sword, which would be an ultra great sword in Dark Souls, a very huge slow weapon that does tremendous amounts of damage but takes a lot of stamina to swing and has some icy abilities. And the Hammer and Chisel, which is an interesting weapon because that's very unusual to have both a hammer and chisel as an actual weapon. And this is your sort of fast roguey weapon that doesn't use much stamina and hits very, very quickly but doesn't stagger enemies as easily and has just some really useful stuff. One of its special abilities is an AoE sort of slam, and the other one is a very high damage single target, slightly ranged attack, so it's very flexible. It's actually probably my favorite weapon in the game because it's so different. Every weapon has 3 possible upgrades that can be applied to them, one of which all weapons have the Quenching Acid upgrade. This Quenching Acid is a thing that you can find and buy in various places, and is a key item that you use to upgrade the damage of every weapon. It's what gives it like the +1 and +2 at the end of its name, and you can upgrade 5 times with the acid, so you can drastically increase the damage of a weapon over time. But I'm not sure if there's enough acid in the game to actually upgrade every weapon to +5. I don't think there is. I don't think there are 20 of them. And each weapon also has 2 special skills that the other 2 upgrades are tied to. You need to find a key item unique to each weapon, and this allows you to do one of those upgrades to actually improve it. So for instance, the starting sword can get a metal spike, and you can upgrade it with that, which activates its first special ability, which causes you to like shoot out this metal spike and stab with it for very large amounts of damage. And you can also later find a molten spike and upgrade it with that for a second special ability that allows you to do the exact same thing, only with a very cool looking sort of fiery spike thing that sets enemies on fire. And every one of these weapons does have 2 specials, and that's how you get them, by finding the key upgrades. And that's where the main build variety in this game comes in, by combining the weapons with the shells and figuring out a strategy for yourself. You may want, say, the Martyr's Blade on the big heavy dude because he can tank some of the extra damage that you may accrue from having such a slow weapon, or you may want it on the lithe, fast Acolyte character because he has the most stamina so he can swing it the most times. You may instead want the Hammer and Chisel on the really fast character because it's a very fast weapon and it fits his style, but having it on, say, the big heavy dude can be nice because he has a passive that allows him to stagger enemies a little bit easier, so it allows you to sort of chain stun enemies a bit with it because it attacks so fast that normally it doesn't have very much stagger potential, but with that extra passive it can help. And the fact that it doesn't take too much stamina to use means that it's easier to attack and then still have enough stamina to roll away with the idea that he doesn't have very much in the first place. So yeah, every weapon definitely has its own niche, and with the upgrades they can get and the combining them with the different shells, that's really where a lot of the combat strategy sort of comes in, and I think they've done it pretty well. You know, there's not a massive amount of variety with 4 weapons and 4 shells, but it's a fairly small game, so I think it actually fits with the overall style they're going for, and the encounter design, the actual levels and how the enemies are placed, do actually allow you to, you know, experiment a little bit. And there also is one ranged weapon in the game. I mentioned there's no magic, but there is a ranged weapon that's called the Ballista Zuka. You have to save up 8,000 tar to unlock it, but once you do, it is very powerful. It is a single shot, very slow but super strong, like bolt thrower basically. It's like the combination of like an arbalist and a rocket launcher. It fires a huge heavy bolt, and it has a very long reload animation, so you have to be careful about using it, but it tends to do a lot of damage and stagger whatever it hits, even bosses. And the ammo for it is very scarce though, so you got to be careful about when to use it, although they are buyable infinitely for money. It's just the ones that you find, you won't find that many, so you'll have to invest some money if you want to use it too often. But I like that it's there, and it does add a little bit of extra strategy to the combat because it allows you to sort of take out some enemies from afar and stuff like that. You just have to worry about the cost of doing so, which is always a fun concept in hard RPGs. You know, having some risk-reward is always a good thing. As far as the level design goes, you have one large forest area that is sort of your hub. It's where you begin. It's the central area of the game. And then there are 3 dungeons, each with 3 sections attached to it that you can tackle in any order that you want, and then eventually one final boss fight. So it's not a large game. It's not a game that'll take you, you know, like dozens and dozens of hours to complete, but I think it's fairly well paced, and I think the overall encounter design, which is important for a game like this, you know, how the enemies are placed in the levels, is pretty reasonable. There is one exception to that, though. I think the encounters are nice, but when you beat one of the big 3 bosses of a dungeon, you get a gland. Yes, really. And you have to go back through the area. This is a cool mechanic that we'll get onto in just a second, but basically it changes the layout of all the dungeons. So when you go back through them, they're a little bit different. And I do find that sometimes they can get a little bit spammy, especially the dungeon that you see right now, the Eternal Narthex area, with this cool like obsidian structure that floats in the air. It's a really neat visual area, but when you go back through it after you have the gland, there's a lot of enemy spam. Like, you know, I had to laugh a little bit when I came up to a staircase that in the first run through was just like a ranged enemy, a melee enemy, and one heavy enemy that was a nice sort of wide open arena to fight them in. But instead, when you have the gland on the way back, there are like 8 of those range enemies just spammed in a line at the top of the stairs. So I do think that even though the overall encounter design is actually pretty good and the enemy placement is mostly reasonable, I think that once you have the glands, some of the areas do get a little bit spammy, more than necessary really. But this does lead us into a cool mechanic that I mentioned, that is the mist. When you have a gland for the first time, a mist will descend on the world, which changes the layouts of the areas, it makes different enemies populate different parts, and it even changes the Fallgrim, the big forest hub area, the most. And once you have done this once, you can actually talk to an NPC and spend a glimpse to bring back the mist whenever you want, because it changes enemies and also allows you to unlock these frog chests that are everywhere to get some neat upgrades that you can only get out of them. So that's another really cool bit of risk reward, because it changes the overall atmosphere of the place and makes the enemy encounters more difficult, but allows you to get some really fun stuff. So if you're comfortable with exploring the more difficult version of the forest, you can find some cool things, and I really like this concept. It also is just a really nice bit of atmosphere, because everything gets all gloomy, the music changes, you hear like a distant bell, and it's all misty, and it's genuinely pretty creepy, and I really like that. Overall, the visual design of the game in general is unsettling and weird, and I like it a lot. I think they've done a really good job of creating this very off dark fantasy world where everything is kind of hard to understand, but not in a way that's super confusing, more in a way that's unsettling and weird, like almost H.R. Giger-esque at some points, and that's really cool. Overall, it's just a really good first effort by this team. It's like a small 15-person team, and it's genuinely impressive. The combat is very satisfying, I gotta say. The actual impact from your weapons and everything, you feel it. It feels good. And of course, since combat is pretty much the main mechanic of games like this, that's important to have very good combat, and it definitely does. The hitboxes and everything that is often a point of contention for games like this seems okay, and there are a couple of attacks that I think maybe reach a little bit too far or hit a little bit earlier than they should, but for the most part, I think the combat is satisfying and well done. So yeah, overall, I really like Mortal Shell. It is a nice first effort, an impressive first effort from a small team, and I think if this could be their Demon Souls, if this could be like their proof of concept, small, focused experience where they learn a whole bunch and then go on to make their Dark Souls, their same idea but expanded in every way with all the things that they've learned, I would love to see that. I think this is a really good proof of concept for a small team. They know what they're doing, they clearly understand what makes games like Dark Souls interesting, what makes them enjoyable, and they aren't just trying to make a game that's like super hardcore difficult without actually understanding what that means. It's clear that they do, and they have passion for this sort of genre of like hardcore action RPG, and it shows. So yeah, that's Mortal Shell. It's really pretty good, and I've enjoyed my time with it more than I haven't, even though I have a couple of issues here and there, like the fact that the consumables don't tell you what they do before you use them, so sometimes you have to waste very rare consumables just to find out what they do before you know how rare they are, which is sort of unfortunate, but even that mechanic is kind of cool because it's cloaked with this familiarity system where the more you use consumables, the more familiar you get with them, and once you maxed out your familiarity, they unlock a new lore entry and improve their effect. Like the basic healing mushrooms heal you much faster, the mushrooms that used to poison you now make you immune to poison, stuff like that. Pretty much everything has some sort of additional effect when you max out its familiarity, as well as getting the extra lore. So that's a really cool concept. I really like it. I just don't like the fact that consumables hide what they do until you use them, which makes shopping a little bit annoying because you don't know whether spending money is worth it because you don't know what half the stuff does. But hey, small complaints for a pretty enjoyable experience overall. If you would like to check it out yourself, I will put the link in the description below, both to the Steam page and to the Epic Store page, because yes, this is on the Epic Store. It is exclusive for a year. I know. I get it, but this video is more about the game itself than the business decisions surrounding the game. I think I've made my stance on the whole Epic nonsense pretty clear in the Metro Exodus video, so I don't really want to repeat myself here. But hey, as a game, I really like it, and I'm excited to see what else these guys do, because they've proven themselves in my eyes with a really enjoyable sort of proof of concept RPG in a style that I really enjoy. So whatever they do next, I'll be very excited to take a look at it. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.